and today I'm going to do a video review of the new Mattel DC Comics Multiverse Reaper figure from the hipster Jim Gordon GCPD Robo Bunny Batman Collect and Connect wave. So the Reaper is a fairly obscure Batman villain. So today I thought it would be cool to also give you some background on the comic books that this character is based on. Batman Year 2 and Batman Full Circle. Now, Batman acts really out of character in these stories, and in fact they aren't in continuity anymore. But I like to view them as like an Elseworlds type story, and I think they're a pretty interesting oddity in the history of Batman. And since we're on the subject, I thought I'd also show you a couple of custom action figures that I made based on Batman Year 2. So let's get started with the review. Cheers. So maybe you've seen this Reaper figure and you thought, so what's this guy's deal? Well, don't worry, I'll tell you right now. There are actually 3 different Reapers in the Batman comics. The first Reaper appeared in 1971 and was a Holocaust survivor who was hunting down and killing Nazi war criminals. Now, if it were up to me, I'd just let him do his own thing, but Batman doesn't like people murdering each other. And honestly, a swift death is too good for a Nazi anyway. They should spend the rest of their lives suffering in jail. Now, all that doesn't have anything to do with this version of the Reaper. The only thing they have in common is the name. The only reason I bring it up really is to avoid confusion, because he always pops up in search results if you were to Google Batman the Reaper. The second version of the Reaper first appeared in a 4-issue story arc called Batman Year 2. Judson Caspian was a wealthy socialite whose wife was shot and killed by a thief who was robbing their house when his family returned home from the circus. Caspian goes crazy and becomes a lethal vigilante known as the Reaper. The Reaper virtually wipes out all crime in Gotham City, retires, and leaves town for 20 years. When Caspian comes back to visit his daughter, who's about to become a nun, he realizes the criminal element has crept back up into Gotham City and resumes his war on crime as the Reaper. His first victims are actually a pair of prostitutes. This is when Batman first encounters the Reaper. Batman gets his ass handed to him. The Reaper actually cuts an X across the bat symbol on Batman's chest with his sickle weapons. Batman drags himself back to Wayne Manor, gets patched up by Alfred, and goes into the study to retrieve a pistol. I think the idea here is that as Batman's enemies become more violent, he must take more severe measures to combat them. And this isn't just any pistol. This is the gun that Joe Chill used to murder Thomas and Martha Wayne. Apparently after Joe Chill shot the Waynes, he tossed the gun away and fled. Bruce Wayne recovers the pistol and kept it hidden in hopes he would someday use it to avenge his parents' death. So the cops and Batman want to stop the Reaper because he's running around killing hookers and shit. The mob hates him too because he's wrecking their crime ring. So they have a meeting to decide what to do. They hire Joe Chill to kill the Reaper. And Batman happens to be hiding in the rafters, eavesdropping on the meeting, when he swoops down and volunteers to help Joe Chill stop the Reaper. So Batman forms an uneasy alliance, and you get the impression that Batman plans on using this as an opportunity to not only stop the Reaper, but also take revenge on Joe Chill. In Year 2, Batman is still trying to find his footing as a costume hero, and Mike Barr attempts to explain why Batman doesn't use guns. In some of his earliest adventures from the Golden Age, Batman did carry a pistol. It's unclear why exactly Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and company decided to stop having Batman use guns, but in comics since then, Batman has adopted a strict no-guns policy. Year 2 tries to explain that from a story standpoint. Year 2 isn't considered canon anymore since a zero-hour event in the 90s, and I imagine most fans dismiss Year 2 because Batman acts so out of character. But I think this story is really great, and I like the notion of a young Batman wrestling with the idea of using firearms. Batman Year 2 was originally published in the pages of Detective Comics in 1987 as a sequel to Batman Year 1 by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. Year 2 was written by Mike W. Barr and illustrated by Alan Davis and Todd McFarlane. I think that Alan Davis is an excellent illustrator, and it's really, really interesting and fun to see a young Todd McFarlane's take on Batman. So I don't want to give away too much in case you're interested in tracking this down and reading it, but Joe Chill does not survive the events of Batman Year 2. Now, I'm not saying Batman kills him, he just doesn't survive. And in the sequel to Year 2, called Full Circle, also written by Mike Barr and illustrated by Alan Davis, we find out that Joe Chill's estranged son was reconnecting with him during the events of Batman Year 2. Joe Chill Jr. follows his father to a rendezvous with Batman and sees them having an altercation. And later, when Joe Chill winds up dead, Joe Chill Jr. assumes that Batman's responsible. So in Batman Full Circle, Joe Chill Jr. assumes the identity of the Reaper, wearing the exact same costume, and tries to exact revenge on Batman. This takes place during Batman's third year of crime fighting, and we can tell that because it features a very young Dick Grayson in his early days of his tenure as Robin. The Batman in Full Circle is another year older, wiser, and more experienced, and as such, he acts much more like the Batman we all know and love. If you liked Year 2, then you'll probably want to check this out. It was originally published in this prestige format in 1991, so you might be able to find a copy of it in the back issues of your local comic shop. And it was also reprinted in a collection called Batman Fear the Reaper in the early 2000s, along with Batman Year 2. And the Reaper also made a very brief, throwaway appearance in Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman comics in the New 52, and just like every other poor bastard in the New 52, he got a really rad, extreme redesign with lots of cool lines and seams everywhere. Awesome! First off, we have my custom Reaper action figure. And this has happened to me several times in the past where I work on a custom figure only to find out not long after that some toy manufacturer is planning on making an official version of the same character. Now, sometimes I'm much more happy with my custom figure than the official version, but in this situation in particular, I think the official DC Comics Multiverse Reaper makes my custom look like shit. Actually, I'm really surprised that DC Multiverse made a Reaper figure. I thought he was way too old and obscure to even be on Mattel's radar. Fittingly, the base body for this Reaper figure was a Marvel Legends Grim Reaper figure from the movie Ultron Build-A-Figure wave. I bought a few of those on clearance for $5 each to use for custom fodder. The hood is from a Funko Legacy Magic the Gathering figure that I also bought on clearance. The shoulder pads, forearm guards, and boots all came from a Mattel WWE figure. The head is a Grim Reaper head. I cut the face off from the nose up and replaced it with a plastic skull charm that came tied around the neck of a bottle of hot sauce. The blades for his sickle weapons obviously came from the Marvel Legends Grim Reaper. The mace part of his weapons were sculpted out of milliput, and I used toothpicks for the spikes. All of the sculpted detail on his biceps, his torso, and his legs was all done by me out of milliput. That was actually the first time I used milliput, so I've improved a little bit. The cape was cut from an inexpensive athletic shirt from Walmart or Target. It's kind of like the off-brand Under Armour. It's a polyester spandex blend, and I like using this kind of material because it has nice weight to it and it doesn't fray when you cut it. I painted the figure all black, and then I dry brushed it with many layers of red acrylic paint to bring out the sculpted detail. So even though my custom Reaper figure is totally outclassed by the new DC Comics Multiverse version, I'm still happy with this guy. I've got lots of different versions of Batman from DC Direct, DC Collectibles, DC UC. Eventually I plan on getting a big shelf to display all of them, and I'm going to kind of consider that my Legends of the Dark Knight shelf. And when I do that, I'll probably end up throwing this custom Reaper figure into the mix. Up next is my custom Year 2 Batman action figure. And this is just a modified version of the DC Universe Classics Batman figure that came in a 2-pack with the red Azrael or John Paul Valley Batman figure. I bought this figure loose on eBay. He was very inexpensive at the time, and I think that was because a lot of collectors didn't like the painted on battle damage. He had one slash across his chest, across the bat symbol there. I added another slash to imitate the artwork from the comic book where the Reaper slashes an X across the bat symbol on Batman's chest. I painted that all with acrylic paints. Another reason why I chose this figure was because a lot of times in Batman Year 2, and especially Todd McFarlane's artwork, Batman doesn't have the black shadow over his face. Also, the color scheme, the shade of blue, really matches the artwork from Batman Year 2. This figure came with 2 grip hands, so in order to make him hold the pistol more convincingly, I used an X-Acto knife to cut in between his index and his middle fingers to give him a trigger finger. Also, the shoulder holster originally came from the most recent Marvel Legends Nick Fury figure. The shoulder holster originally came with a pistol sculpted inside. It was not removable. I didn't like that at all, so I used an X-Acto knife to cut that detail out of the holster to make it look like it was empty. Right above that pouch on his chest was another strap. I cut that and I kind of tapered it so that I could wedge it in between his cape and his chest. Basically, I painted the whole shoulder holster light brown and then gave it a paint wash with a darker brown acrylic paint, and I painted all the buckles and snaps with a gold acrylic paint. I'm really happy with the way this has turned out, and I think he makes a really unique addition to my Batman collection. Here we have the DC Comics Multiverse Reaper figure from the Rookie Robo Bunny Batman Collect and Connect wave. Even though this figure makes my custom completely obsolete now, I was still really excited when he was first announced, and also kind of surprised because he's such an obscure Batman villain, and as far as I know, hasn't made appearances in any other kind of media besides comic books. I think this figure is a step in the right direction for Mattel as far as sculpting, articulation, and accessories go, but he is not without his problems. One thing I've noticed is that the cape seems like it's a little bit too long, and it makes it hard for you to stand the figure flat on his feet. So for articulation, you can turn the Reaper's head from side to side. It's a little bit hindered by the cape and the hood here, but I would rather have him look more comic book accurate and a little bit less articulation. His shoulders are a little hard to see because of the cape and this chest piece here, but it's basically a ball hinge shoulder. Moves out to the side about that far, and you can move it forward and back some, but it's a little hindered by the cape and makes that chest piece look a little wobbly. He has swivel biceps that work really well and help you achieve more dynamic poses with the sickle weapons. He has a single jointed elbow that looks really nice and clean. This figure comes with a pair of closed-fisted hands that you can swap out with the sickle weapons, and not only do they swivel like your typical DC Universe Classics or DC Multiverse, but they've also got a hinge right here that works really well, and I think that's a big step in the right direction for Mattel. He has an ab crunch joint that goes this far forward and pretty far back, actually, more than I would have expected with a big bulky cape like this. He has a swivel joint at the waist, which I'll never use because it breaks up the sculpt too much. He has this nice new hip articulation that looks a lot better than the old DC Universe Classics figures and some of the earlier DC Multiverse figures, and you get just the same range of motion out of it, and you don't get that really ugly cutout spot here on the inside of his thigh. Unfortunately, he still has this really ugly cut joint at the mid-thigh, and I wish that Mattel would either put that joint up here where it's a little bit less noticeable, or just make these ball socket joints right here and here so that you would get a little bit of movement back and forth at the hip there, and then completely get rid of this joint. I hate that. Just looks terrible, and it's not very functional either. The worst part of the Reaper's articulation is his single jointed knees, and it just feels really flimsy. I would recommend when you open this figure for the first time, before you start posing him a lot, get some hot water or hair dryer to kind of, break these joints in a little bit before you start posing him. I think it's a shame that he doesn't have double jointed knees, because I think this knee pad really lends itself to a double joint the way it's designed. It looks really nice and clean, but like I said, it doesn't give you a lot of range of motion, and it feels really fragile. The Reaper also has a hinge at the ankle, but that's it. There's no ankle rocker, and not a lot of range of motion with the ankle. He can point and flex his foot, but that's about it. Another thing that I've noticed is that the pegs that fit into the calf here and into his foot are square, and I think that if they were round, then it would give you a little bit of range of motion here and here, like swivel joints, and it wouldn't have cost Mattel any extra. In the comic books, the Reaper really doesn't have any other weapons or accessories besides the 2 sickle weapons. So I'm pretty happy with the amount of accessories that this figure comes with. I'm actually kind of surprised that Mattel even included these alternate hands without the weapons. These sickle accessories are really nice and straight right out of the package. I didn't have to use a hair dryer to get them straightened out or anything. They're made out of a pretty good quality plastic that is pretty sturdy. And it would have been cool if the figure had some kind of clip or something so you could store the sickles on his back like he does in the comics, but it's not a big deal for me. And I'm definitely going to be displaying the figure with the sickle accessories as opposed to the alternate hands, but I'm still really glad that Mattel decided to include those. It adds a little extra value for your money. I think all the sculpted detail in this figure is done really well. He looks like he walked right out of a comic book panel from Batman Year 2 or Batman Full Circle. And this is all original sculpting. These are not reused parts from some other DC Universe or DC Multiverse figure. So I think that's really, really great, and again, a step in the right direction for Mattel. The paint work on this figure is pretty sparse. He has a little bit of paint shading on his abdomen there. Obviously, his skull mask is painted silver. That looks really nice and clean. Also, the spikes on his costume all have a metallic red paint on them. The only real complaint with the paint work on this figure is that where the cape meets the chest plate is really sloppy. I think it could have been done a little bit nicer. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with the paint and sculpted detail in this figure. Here we have the DC Comics Multiverse Reaper figure next to the DC Collectibles Phantasm figure from Batman Mask of the Phantasm. And if you haven't seen Batman Mask of the Phantasm, I highly recommend it. It just came out recently on Blu-ray. It's fantastic and arguably the best Batman movie ever made. If you have seen Mask of the Phantasm, then you know that underneath these suits, these characters couldn't be more different from each other. But I think it's obvious that the design for the Phantasm was inspired by the Reaper. So finally, here's the new DC Comics Multiverse Reaper figure with some other Batman Rogues figures that I have in my collection. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. Batman Year 2 and Full Circle are not my favorite Batman stories by any means, but I find them really bizarre and kind of fascinating. And I hope you enjoyed checking out some of my custom figures also. So until next time, take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye.